Every newly encountered species is expected to find its place in the stellar accord. Most of them end up perishing. Once the gate network opens into a new inhabited system, an official contact team and its usual entourage of followers jump through. The token compact warships hover ominously, translation packets and threat assessments are hastily assembled. My species warranted a brief, harmless, grounded, and a mere 2 GB morpheme map, and numerous alien vessels rush towards the newly contacted race, bringing the marvels of interstellar civilization. One or two voxel ships begin trading for local specialties in pursuit of their species' aim to consume a piece of everything and everyone in the galaxy. A fledgling Thrax vessel discreetly examines the various planetary bodies for new nursery worlds. Merchants and primitive art experts sample the planet's cultural offerings, while science ships gather whatever data they can find. There's even the occasional pleasure yacht or schooner, home to some wealthy and well-connected savant out on a leisure trip. All are secure in the knowledge that the might of the compact navy will safeguard them. Then a month elapses, and the compact's initial protective period concludes. The compact officials lament their failure to reach a mutually beneficial agreement, collect their warships, and depart. All the various emissaries of civilization follow suit. Merc raiders arrive and pillage the system. A few days later, one ship always remains, though. An AVR vessel, its crew selected from the finest of the remnant flock, stands a final watch over the newly contacted race. When the Merc come, they retaliate. I'd been chosen for the privilege of a crew position aboard the RFS Everlasting only a few months before the Helios Gate became operational. If my extensive study of linguistics and xenopsychology had given me an advantage, a lengthy, year-long assignment aboard a GRX Commerce freighter had all but guaranteed me the position. Nobody else in the fleet was as well equipped to deliver our warning to a new race. The Helios contact occurred years sooner than anyone in compact space had anticipated, catching the remnant flock off guard for the first time in 100 years. The Everlasting was still incomplete, fitted with only a few undersized Gracer projectors and lacking deployable defenses. The crew hadn't even started to reach full combat readiness. We had no alternative, though. We departed for Helios. Our first indication of anything out of the ordinary came when we obtained a contact package from a sympathetic Wally merchant captain. We lowly client races don't get the full splendor of the compact navy. We make do with leftovers. Instead of the brief, unimaginative description the bored GCN bureaucrats typically delighted in, Helios had merited 2 full paragraphs. Contacted species appears capable of basic manned spaceflight, acceleration of manned vessels limited by the resilience of their bodies, but evidence of rudimentary projectile weapons that can surpass these limitations have been noted. Caution: contacted species have colonized 2 planets. Planetary body the 3 seems to be the homeworld of contacted species. Standard, carbon-based oxygen-nitrogen atmosphere. Be wary of strong tidal forces, unpredictable geological activity, and severe weather patterns. Planetary body Ivis appears to be a colony of the contacted species. Be cautious of harsh weather and thin atmosphere. On their own, none of these details were unexpected. Helios wasn't the first system where life had evolved on harsh and dangerous worlds, and this newly contacted race was far from the first to achieve primitive spaceflight by contact. But for a species to endure long enough on a broken planet to reach the stars was nearly unprecedented. The translation protocols were unusual as well. Instead of the typical 3 or 4 dialects, it listed more than 50 distinct languages. I'd only ever encountered that many in studies of scattered tribal species, races of individuals destined to perish on the same rock where they were born. It seemed implausible that a spacefaring race could function with as many divisions as they had. When I brought my concerns to the flock lord, however, he merely fluttered his wings in amusement. The compact team might just be attempting to make this charade sound significant. It wouldn't be the first time one of those scoundrels fabricated information. I don't believe they faked this, sir, I responded. Anyone clever enough to produce this level of detail and consistency would never accept it. I'm nearly certain it's genuine. The flock lord folded his wings down in worry. Does this impact our calling? No, sir. Despite evidence of a diverse and fragmented culture, They've formed some kind of unified front towards us and the compact ships. Most of the flotilla is calling it the Human Alliance. Human? Appears to be what they call themselves collectively, sir, although they've got a whole array of other names. No clue why they'd need a dozen different ways to label a flockmate, but they've got them. It won't matter for much longer. Locate their leaders and make contact with them. I blinked in surprise. I hadn't expected to do anything more than advise on language in this matter. It seems their leaders are nested in the large rotating space station just beyond the limits of the gate. Most of the flotilla's focusing their efforts there. You'd better join them, establish a connection, and begin the warning process while I get the rest of our crew into fighting shape. 2 hours later, I was awkwardly perched across from a human, resisting the urge to flee. Humans are undeniably predators. Even the way the man opposite me assessed me made my feathers itch. On an AVR ship, I would have scurried up the walls to safety, but on this confined vessel, the 6-foot behemoth could easily reach me wherever I escaped. While AVR are certainly striking, there isn't a race in compact space that finds us intimidating. We measure the 4 feet from our rear climbing arms to our head, though our wings span a good 6 feet when unfurled, and make do with our thick coat of downy feathers and a bandolier instead of clothing. Our wings boast enough color to compensate, though, and 4 deep scarlet orbs add a touch of majesty to our beaked face. We're a species born to ride the thermals of our homeworld and nest among its tall trees. We fended off the predators of our past through sheer numbers and tools, and we fled to the skies when we could not. We never entered an enclosed area with a predator, sat down opposite it, and shook hands. Millions of years of evolution screamed in terror when I realized that the voice in my ear, provided by my small translation device, wanted me to allow the human to grasp one of my appendages and move it up and down. I had to suppress a strong impulse to relieve myself and run when I felt the carefully controlled power of the muscles in his hand. Another wave of fear arose when he revealed a rather intimidating set of teeth in my direction. Only the gentle, persistent voice in my ear prevented a catastrophic first human-aviar encounter. That said, it still took me a good 30 seconds to notice he was expecting a reply. I blinked apologetically. I'm sorry, but I'm afraid I missed that last part. I felt a surge of surprise as the human showed his teeth again and emitted a warbling sound somewhat similar to our own joicing. The voice in my ear called it laughter. That's a first. Most everyone I've met today hasn't cared much about what I said. I'm Mark Comet, Junior Ambassador of the United Humanity Alliance, and I'd like to formally ask the reason for your visit. In slightly less than one of your months, almost everyone who arrived through that gate today will leave. Then the Merc will come. Then you'll die. To my surprise, this elicited another laugh. So you're saying all the friendly aliens are going to depart, and then the hostile aliens are going to arrive and eliminate us all? They did to the aviar. The human grew quiet. The aviar? My people, the flock. When the gate connection formed, we were thrilled. We'd long dreamed of the stars. What flying species doesn't? But we never expected someone to give us the key for free. In a way, they didn't. Some compact official deemed us a dead end, more valuable as a commodity than a people. And the compact allowed their merc privateers to enter our system. They massacred us. Warships filled our skies and rained destruction on our cities and forests. The most fortunate among us were captured and taken as slaves. Others were rounded up and slaughtered, sold as an exotic delicacy to species like the voxel, or simply killed for sport. Hold on, the voxel, the human interjected. Those Ewoks that were trading for nothing but food. That sounds like the voxel. They have some kind of religious obsession with consuming sentience. One of the more unpleasant species out there. They do a lot of business with the merc occupying our homeworld. Ugh! So how did you all end up here? The question came out of the blue. Pardon? If your species became livestock, how did you manage to bring a ship alongside the galaxy's finest? Oh, the remnant of the great flock that survived the merc occupation stole one of their ships. They didn't view us as a threat. Most of us were either confined in breeding camps or adorning buffet tables across the galaxy by then. We weren't advanced enough to overpower the guards on one ship, let alone 3, but we pulled it off. We call it the escape. The translation the small box squawked out left me feeling somewhat shortchanged. In our language, the escape is a beautiful, harsh, and hopeful string of musical notes that are difficult to sing without feeling a bit awestruck. In the human tongue, it's 3 syllables. So all 3 got out? No, just one. 2 sacrificed themselves to save the last surviving Flocklord's vessel. We built up from there. Still doesn't explain why you're here. Where else would we be? Before we were artists and poets and sculptors and singers. We never learned to hate until the Merc came. But we learned that lesson well. It's the highest honor to be chosen to resist them. The AVR have stood alongside 100 species through their final days. So you send ships to die. The human's surprisingly expressive face contorted into a frown. You expect us to stop the Merc? The compact ensures they get powerful ships and fearsome weapons. They like their status quo too much to let any but the most selective species reach membership. Those compact bureaucrats negotiating with your senior ambassadors are stalling. The deadline they've given you for admittance is going to pass. Everyone but us is going to leave, and then the Merc are going to come raiding. They've done it before. They'll do it again. We might be able to alter that last part, the human said as his face broke into a fierce grin. We've been getting ready. I was led into what appeared to be a holding area. The array of food items set up in the corner immediately caught my attention, and after a discreet scan with my datapad, there's about a 50-50 chance that 2 species can consume the same food. I reached out and grabbed a small, soft item I couldn't identify. Its aroma reminded me of a native grass we'd managed to recover from Netagy, but its tough exterior and spongy interior didn't quite match my mental image of the small tufts of seeds. I'd nibbled off about half of it, my eyes shut in delight as the rich, slightly tangy flavor washed over me when someone spoke. Enjoying the sourdough? My composure finally crumbled. Before the speaker had finished, I'd scrambled up into the corner of the ceiling, my climbing limbs gripping the grate of a small air vent. The human, only partway into the room, looked at me with surprise. Whoa! Didn't mean to startle you, just wanted to check if you liked the food. Wasn't certain if we'd get it right, only had a couple of hours to prepare it all, you know. My translator was speaking into my ear again. It identified the fair-skinned human as female, and, belatedly, drew my attention to the humor in the newcomer's tone. I cautiously descended back to the floor, fully intending to smooth things over. My inquisitiveness got the better of me, though. Sourdough? Yes, bread, like the roll you were eating. You seem to be savoring it. It's good, though I've been raised on mealworm and grass seeds, so that's not too surprising. Never had a chance to sample a planet's cuisine before. Enjoy it while you can, then. I'm Hope Starling, by the way, Senior United Earth Alliance Ambassador. Thought this would make a better meeting room than one of the cells we had you in earlier. I glanced up at the high ceiling. It is a bit more spacious. She smiled, and for once I didn't feel the urge to dash for a high branch. Perhaps there was something in the bread. So, she said after a pause, what's your name? I had been anticipating this question since we boarded, and it almost surprised me that it hadn't come up earlier. AVR don't really have names, I replied. We're known by description, or by scent, or song, but seldom by name. If you must call me something, mottled crest-broken tail feather will suffice, but it's not necessary. We hadn't even named our homeworld Nadiji when the Merc arrived. Really? Why AVR and Netagy? They're the initial parts of the dirge the Flocklord sang as we escaped. Loosely translated to English, they mean those who shall remember, and the place of those who shall remember. Ah, that makes sense. She fell silent for another moment, then spoke again, this time more softly. We believe you. Just like that? Most other races require a bit more convincing. You've only had the data we provided for a few of your hours, and I doubt you began analyzing it immediately. I've been in discussions with these so-called compact specialists since the moment that gate activated. Humans spend enough time arguing to recognize when somebody's stalling, and these guys are textbook examples. So what do you intend to do about it? I probably shouldn't have been as direct as I was, but AVR aren't politicians. Besides, she didn't seem to take offense. Like John said, we've been preparing. She retrieved a small screen from a pocket and tapped a control. I took the opportunity to scurry over to the buffet table and grab another piece of bread. By the time I returned to my seat, the center of the room had become a holotank. A small three-dimensional image of the gate was projected in the middle of the room, along with a scaled image of the station. There were also numerous ships that I couldn't recall seeing from the deck of the Everlasting. On screen, they looked formidable, even if the humans' tech level made them easy to dismiss. We detected the gate about half a century ago. Some fortunate individual had his telescope aimed at a star when it passed in front. He drew a straight line from its position to one of Venus's Lagrange points, reset his scope, and caught it passing in front of another star. The thing was moving at a considerable fraction of the speed of light, and it was decelerating. Asteroids don't behave like that. We've imagined first contact for some time, but having it right at our doorstep still came as quite a surprise. It took roughly a decade of conflict to settle down. Conflict with whom? I interjected. Who had these humans fought if all the aliens were on the other side of the gate? Ourselves, she replied dismissively. I noted that as a troubling yet intriguing revelation as she went on. We nearly annihilated ourselves trying to reach an agreement about what to do with this. My faction prevailed eventually. What was once called the United Nations became the United Human Alliance, and we began construction. In case the object was peaceful, we created this ship. Spared no expense, really, and attempted to make it suitable for as many forms of life as we could imagine. Almost achieved a perfect score, too, she added with a grin. Didn't have quite the right setup for those plants. I chimed in when my translator finished explaining their concept of a plant. The Thrax? They wouldn't come aboard even if you could accommodate them. They do everything through those domesticated insects of theirs. I'm not even certain if they can communicate. Strange. I'll relay that to our Xenos. They'll be fascinated. Anyway, we constructed this spaceship in case the contact was peaceful. We also prepared an alternative, if not. There's two lines of defense. First are these incredibly powerful, solar-powered laser arrays. There's about a dozen of them that we use for asteroid mining, but we always sort of intended to melt ships with them. Based on what our techs are saying about your ship alloys, we should be able to burn through them rather quickly. Most of the ships will have shields to deal with that, I said. Something to do with neutralizing a significant part of the wave while it's within the field of effect. If it's strong enough, it'll penetrate, but it'll take time and energy. Makes sense. What are these gracers the scientists have been mentioning then? Something like concentrated gravity waves. Although that's all I know. I fluttered my wings apologetically as I spoke. I'm not very technical. My areas of expertise are xenobiology and linguistics. They're short range, though, aren't they? Our best estimates put their range at about 10,000 kilometers. There was another pause while my translator deciphered what a kilometer was. Yeah, that sounds about right. Excellent. One more quick question. What do your ships use for point defense? I was confused again. Point defense? You know, for intercepting missiles and ballistic weapons. We've got some cannons for breaking up small rocks and meteors, if that's what you mean. But they're not used much. Why would we worry about that? And what do you mean by missile? I'd seen the word in the original compact briefing for the Helios system, but I hadn't bothered to understand what it meant. My translator was proving rather unhelpful now, too. The human didn't seem to notice. Her face broke into a predatory smile as she pressed a button on her small screen, and her next word sent shivers down my spine. Excellent, she said again. Her eyes were fixed on the holotank as the orderly scene descended into chaos. A fleet of Merc ships, larger than anything I expected to see in Helios, burst through the scale model gate. The cruisers were uncannily accurate. Whatever these humans were, they were incredibly good at piecing together information. The lasers Faith had boasted of tried to cut into the ships, but the screens I described a moment before made them almost ineffective. The Merc ships bore down on the human fleet unopposed. Unopposed, that is, until tens of thousands of small projectiles erupted from the space around the gathered human ships. I could only watch silently as the missiles pursued the Merc raiders, slamming into their sides and igniting like so many small, fierce stars. Within moments, the only ships left on the holotank belonged to the humans. The simulated Merc raiders were little more than molten debris. "They'll never see it coming," said Faith, still grinning. "We'll get the bastards." If the Stellar Accord had known the extent of the humans' preparation for the gate, they never would have come through. They might even have destroyed it, risking the wrath of whatever elder race activated the network countless millennia ago in order to cut humans off from their peaceful status quo. But instead they came unaware, and their honeyed words and false friendship only made the humans furious. As our small AVR delegation toured the expansive human shipyards, concealed from the gate by their star's mass, I began to realize that I never wanted to provoke the humans' anger. They hadn't known what might emerge through the gate, or if something as simple as positioning a star between themselves and the gate would deceive incoming aliens, but they'd hidden their critical industry nonetheless. Such a level of caution and resolve was astounding. I suspect the humans were just as surprised as we were when they discovered their industries had gone unnoticed. It only added another advantage to the humans' already impressive industrial capacity. Manufacturing in the compact operates somewhat differently than in human shipyards. The collective knowledge of the galaxy is remarkably comprehensive, with only a few frustratingly complex problems remaining in the furthest reaches of physics. Our industrial processes reflect this. Compact shipwrights pursue perfection at the atomic and subatomic level, creating vessels that function for millennia with minimal maintenance. The results are magnificent, elegant, and exceptionally long-lasting. But they do have one drawback. Ships take an eternity to construct. It's one reason why the AVR remnant flock consists of only about a dozen permanent vessels, all of designs that have long since fallen out of fashion. Not obsolete, mind you. It's difficult for something to become obsolete when the last major scientific breakthrough occurred before your species developed language. Designs simply go out of style every century or so, ensuring a steady stream of business for the compact-controlled shipyards. Humans had taken a different approach to their shipbuilding. When I heard they'd concealed a shipyard on the far side of the solar system, I thought they might produce one ship every few years. Perhaps they'd manage 2 or 3 a year if it was large enough, but it didn't seem very probable. Only the most impressive compact military shipyards achieve that kind of output. You can hardly fault me for my skepticism at Hope Starling's assertion that the UHSS Vulcan could produce hundreds of warships annually. Unless you're manufacturing disposable vessels, that's not feasible, I declared bluntly. You'd construct more ships in a decade than the entire compact military could manage in a century. They're not vessels like yours, she conceded, and they're not all the size of the Everlasting, but they're quite impressive nonetheless, and the shipyard's capacity is sufficient to handle it. Her words proved to be somewhat understated. Their shipyard was the size of a small moon, a maze of vacuum-exposed dry docks and living quarters. Compared to the elegant, needle-like star docks the compact preferred, enormous structures that built individual ships in pressurized microgravity, the human shipyards appeared chaotic, wild, and terribly exposed. I could observe thousands of humans working on numerous unfinished hulls, shielded from the harsh void only by thin vac suits. Some were even drifting freely, directing their movement with small bursts of what seemed to be ejected matter. None of them appeared concerned about floating through the void untethered. These humans are mad, I thought. Wonderfully, beautifully, mad. The shuttle docked, and Faith guided my small delegation through to one of the habitat modules. It rotated like the massive vessel they had parked just outside of the gate, providing a mild yet pleasant sense of gravity. Its corridors were still too confined for my taste, but at least I could feel my own weight. A human Rear Admiral, Victor Steelheart, was awaiting us in a conference room along with several of his aides. One of them, an AVR tactician we'd sent over about a week ago, rushed over to me for a brief report. The rest of my delegation began to make their introductions. They didn't exaggerate about anything, she said. Over 500 ships ready for combat, most of them being loaded with their missiles, and all of their missiles updated with the new control model we developed. It was somewhat unnerving when their technicians realized how much more intelligent they could make their weapons. What about their stealth capabilities? I inquired, bringing up the other claim that some AVR engineers had outright refused to accept. Excellent, though not for the reasons you might expect. They'd never even heard of grav fields or matter annihilation before contact, so all their ships use undetectable nuclear reactors. No anti-plants disturbing their local spacetime, and no grav wedges sending out ripples as they accelerate. The only way to detect their ships is on the near-hazard sensors. But every ship has those sensors, right? I responded, one engineer's fervent disbelief still fresh in my mind. Otherwise, we'd never be able to avoid debris and rocks when near gravity wells. Their ships have that too. They call it radar, and it's their only sensor system. The clever bastards found a way around it. Military ships absorb radar pulses like they're nothing, and what they can't absorb, they reflect back away from the detectors. Add in the matte black paint job they apply to every ship, and they become pretty difficult to spot. We can't see them? No, their thrust would show up quite clearly on a good heat scan, but we've only got those on science vessels. Even if there are a few warships in compact space with the right equipment to spot them, none of them are crewed by Merc. The attaché paused for a moment, looking slightly uneasy. Have I missed anything on the Everlasting, sir? It's hard to keep up with the news out here. They keep EM transmissions to a minimum, and I haven't wanted to use time on their tight beam relays, so... My four eyes blinked in surprise. Her last week here must have been agony, cut off from the flock. You have no idea what's happening across the system? None, sir. Anything out of the ordinary? A quick look around the room was enough for me to realize that I wasn't needed. Human and AVR military minds were engrossed in a discussion of ship placement and tactics that was far beyond my comprehension, leaving me free for gossip. AVR love gossip. The humans have been running circles around the compact bureaucracy. Once they recognized the process for the charade it was, their attorneys began uncovering dozens of compact legal precedents and presenting them to the bureaucrats. They turned away the Thrax seed ship using some centuries-old non-aggression technicality, then got the compact gunboats to keep all unauthorized alien vessels within 100,000 kilometers of the gate due to some obscure first contact regulation. They even persuaded the Voxel to trade some of their better goods for a couple boxes of wafers and fermented grape juice. I don't think a contact expedition's ever been so frustrated. Wish I could have witnessed it. Has our flock lord relayed any of this back home? No, we only brought one comm buoy, and we're reserving that for our final moments. We're not going to transmit it a week before the Merc arrive. She started to nod in understanding, then halted suddenly. Hold on. A week? We're barely halfway through the contact period. Why a week? She must have been more isolated than I thought. I'd assumed everyone knew how the negotiations had concluded. You really haven't heard. The humans grew weary of the whole facade. They expelled the compact. In our many centuries of feudal resistance to the Merc, the AVR had never encountered a race willing to slam the door in the compact's face. Humanity was the first. The official delegation and their gunboats departed first, not even bothering to warn the cluster of merchant ships and explorers that had followed them to the far reaches of the galaxy. The other merchant vessels pursued them in a disorganized swarm as, one by one, they realized they might be stranded in the system when the Merc arrived. Within a few hours, the space outside the gate was empty except for the UHS Artemis. Half a day later, it was once again filled with ships. Human ships, though. Human ships prepared for combat. While the humans had been intent on making peaceful first contact with whatever came through the gate, they'd long since learned to be wary of the unknown. So while the civilian crew of the Artemis space station prepared to either welcome new allies or perish at the hands of unfamiliar foes, their military concealed themselves throughout the system and readied themselves for conflict. Swarms of small vessels concealed themselves in the gravity well of Jupiter and Venus, suppressing their electromagnetic emissions with a discipline that would astonish those unfamiliar with the distinctly human concept of submarine warfare. Hundreds more descended to the surface of Earth and Mars, while another fleet maintained watch over the UHSS Vulcan. They couldn't conceal all of them. A few of their older warships still glided through the system, guarding their asteroid mines and civilian shipping, piracy being one of the many things humans excel at alarmingly, but they tucked away enough ships to deceive the automated compact probes. With the compact ships departed from the system, humanity's fleets revealed themselves. Over a dozen squadrons of Banisher-class missile cruisers lay in wait, each comprising 24 ships ready to unleash death upon any hostile entity that might emerge through the gate. I remained somewhat awed by the sheer volume of fire each could deliver, Rather than simply propelling rocks from a tube, as I'd anticipated the humans might do, each ship could eject 2 missile pods every 6 seconds, with each pod containing 7 missiles. Every cruiser carried over 300 pods, allowing them to sustain their maximum rate of fire for 15 minutes of combat. As if that weren't sufficient, the humans had towed out a couple hundred larger pods, each loaded with 10 missiles apiece. I could scarcely imagine how long a compact shipyard would require to craft the tens of thousands of missiles needed to defend the gate, but our human allies assured us they weren't even close to depleting their supply. Concealed closer to the gate was a small squadron of boarding vessels, crewed by entire platoons of humans, daring enough to attempt capturing an enemy ship intact. A few AVR had even agreed to join them as guides and fellow boarders. The rest of our crew considered them mad, privately hoping they would be fortunate enough to avoid the fight. 20 dreadnoughts, their kilometer-long bulk overshadowing that of their cruiser screens, drifted a short distance back from the ambush forces. These ships couldn't hide, having been constructed to serve as the focus of the humans' powerful solar array, and attempted to compensate with incredibly heavy armor. Compact military technology had rendered them obsolete. The energy-canceling screens around the Merc cruisers would nullify their main weapons, and a grazer shot would tear through their armor as if it were mere scrap metal. They would serve to lure the Merc cruisers into the heart of the human ambush, though, and were crewed by volunteers in case the missile barrage failed to neutralize the raiders before they reached the vulnerable capital ships. The Everlasting, though scarcely a tenth their size, formed part of the dreadnought formation. We were part of the bait, and I, as the civilian leader of the expedition, stood dressed for combat on the bridge beside Faith. Our flock lord was presently questioning the Faith about the mass of what the humans termed irregulars bringing up the rear. They consisted of everything from pleasure yachts to science vessels, and most were unarmed. When our flock lord had been notified, he'd marched over to the human liaison and demanded to know why the human government had compelled its civilians to fight. She'd chuckled. Compelled? We couldn't have forced them if we tried every warship in the fleets, either here or hidden in reserve around Vulcan, Earth, and Mars. I'd never witnessed a flock lord shift from anger to bewilderment so swiftly. What do they hope to achieve? If the Merc break through, to them, they'll be massacred. The Everlasting alone could rip that crowd apart. Most of them won't end up fighting. They'll resupply military vessels, search for survivors, or evacuate wounded sailors. And if the Merc do overwhelm our fleet, then at least they'll perish fighting. It seemed the flock lord wanted to debate the point, but any further protests were interrupted by a terse update from the TAC officer. The gate's activating. Something massive is coming through. The usual background noise of the bridge ceased as every eye turned towards the screen. For a brief moment, even the most fidgety among us was motionless. Everyone observed the gate. When the TAC officer next spoke, his typical calm assurance was gone, replaced with incredulity and dread. I couldn't fault him. Gate transmission complete, sir. Appears to be 10, no 20, no 40 heavy cruisers, sir, escorting an as-yet unidentified vessel. Initial scans have it labeled as one of the compact's gate crashers, likely the GCS Ram. He hesitated and glanced at the flock lord. Sir, they'd never simply hand over a ship like that to the Merc. It's worth 100 heavy cruisers, sir. They'd never surrender one to the Merc. The flock lord was at a loss for words. He was as astonished as the rest of us. In a corner of the Everlasting's bridge, our singer commenced our battle dirge. Its sorrowful notes resonated through the vessel and over our communication system, to be preserved by a small convoy discreetly positioned near the gate. It would be sung by the AVR until the last of us fell silent, and we would be remembered. The human ships listened as well. Even as they prepared for battle, 1,000 ships heard our lament. Faith, one of the few humans on the bridge, leaned in and murmured in my ear, "How bad is it? What do the additional ships signify?" "It means," I replied, pausing to savor the moment, "that we're all going to perish regardless." The dirge intensified as the 12-kilometer-long ram glided into the midst of the human ambush, like some ancient primordial shark, its escorts darting about it like minnows. None of them thought to search for the hundreds of human ships positioned around them. Somewhere on the bridge, Faith and the flock lord were responding to the Merc captain's demands for surrender. I disregarded it, focusing on the singer's soft, melancholy notes. It wasn't sufficient, I thought. Everything the humans possess, everything they've accomplished, wasn't enough. We can't halt that monster. I was still immersed in my despair when the ram entered the human's kill box. As our singer paused to await the battle's commencement, the only sounds on the bridge were Faith's furious shouts as she rejected the merc's twisted offer of mercy. Then the humans opened fire, and the singer sang of war. A single human missile is a frightening weapon. Tipped with a fusion warhead, its massive drive provides it with more than 20,000 kilometers of powered flight. Radar scattering armor, powerful computers nestled in its core guide its flight, prioritizing targets and attack patterns with merciless efficiency. And advanced sensors, combining centuries of human ingenuity and the pinnacle of galactic technology, always know where its target is. A human missile never loses your trail. Few captains have had to contend with just one missile, however. In combat, humans launch volleys of thousands. Each Banisher-class cruiser can deploy 2 missile pods every 6 seconds, and each pod contains 7 missiles. Over the span of a minute, a squadron of 24 cruisers can thus prepare a salvo of 3,360 missiles. The humans brought 15 full-strength Banisher squadrons to the first Battle of Helios. They'd also towed another 5,000 system defense pods into position, each of which could release 11 missiles. When they fired, 100,000 missiles hurtled towards the 40 Merc heavy cruisers and the GCS Ram. Nearly 1,000 missiles targeted each heavy cruiser, closing the 17,000-kilometer gap in 20 seconds. Most of them never fired a shot, their sensors and crew overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the humans' assault. Others unleashed Grasser burst after Grasser burst into the missile swarms, or attempted to retreat to the safety of the gate. None of it was sufficient. The missiles found their marks, and energy screens designed to slow lasers and gravity fields did little to mitigate the warhead's fury. The remaining 60,000 missiles assailed the ram, overwhelming the super dreadnought's point defenses and plunging through towards the hull. Though its hundreds of Grazer batteries achieved missile kills by the dozens, it scarcely mattered. 50,000 missiles penetrated. Only one Merc cruiser survived the initial salvo, spared by some tactician's desire for prisoners when the humans were still unaware of the ram. The missiles left it untouched even as the other 39 raiders disintegrated under the force of hundreds of nuclear detonations. The ram wasn't so easily defeated. Its hull was scorched, its sensors momentarily blinded, and dozens of its Grasser batteries fused shut, but it hardly mattered. It sustained cosmetic damage, warranting minor repairs at best. The humans hadn't halted it, the ram kept advancing. On the bridge of the RFS Everlasting, the AVR's battle song had swelled to a fevered crescendo. The bridge crew was alert and prepared, the usual background chatter replaced by a grim focus. In the span of 5 minutes, our newly acquired human allies had destroyed more Merc than we had managed to do in our 2 millennia wandering the stars. It was somewhat intimidating. The ram was still approaching, though. We were still doomed. Hope Starling, having finished yelling at the Merc commander, made her way back to mottled crest-broken Tailfeather's observation post. "That bastard's resilient." "Naturally," the AVR replied. "It's a super dreadnought that can traverse a nova. The Compact constructed 3 of them a few centuries ago. They haven't needed to replace them since." We watched helplessly as the ram fired its main gun, a colossal Grazer with an impressive range, and tore through one of the smaller human dreadnoughts. The UHS Byzantium leaked escape pods as its crew abandoned the doomed vessel. Our status display flashed weapons-free as the human admiralty rushed to respond. The orders didn't really affect Mottled, a linguist by training, but it was still pleasant to be included. A steady stream of missiles began to pound into the ram, the human cruiser squadrons staggering their fire into a concentrated stream of destruction. Some scattered randomly over the surface of the super dreadnought's hull, forcing their Grassers into defensive fire and masking the fragile Banishers, but most of the missiles spiraled in as a focused beam of fire. As the barrage of fire swept back and forth across the ram's hull, Gracer blisters began to fall silent. It wasn't sufficient. The ram's armor, forged to withstand the fury of a star, held the missile's fury at bay. Its screens, able to strip a nova of its power, left terawatt lasers wanting. Its lance struck out once more, and the UHS Valiant was lost with all hands. Our battle song rose and fell, mourning the loss of the fallen even as it thirsted for more. The ram continued its approach. The battle song echoed through the speakers of the UHS Ironclad as it trembled under 5 gravities of acceleration. Swift-winged darting flame shuddered beneath the force. Even with the aid of an oversized crash couch and a small, nearly imperceptible inertial dampener, the AVR warrior's bones still threatened to fracture and tear him apart. He had volunteered for this ordeal a week ago, intent on demonstrating his species' value to the remarkable new race, and had trained with 3rd Squad ever since. Now he and the rest of the human boarding team hurtled towards the ram. The Ironclad and her sister ships reduced their acceleration for the final approach, rotating their noses away from the ship as they streaked towards the invader's massive form. As they covered the last few hundred kilometers, the missile salvos intensified, and electronic warfare drones joined their more explosive counterparts, tripling the number of targets the super dreadnought's already strained sensors detected. The stealthy payload-class attack shuttles, constructed with the same sharp lines and radar-absorbing armor of the larger Banisher cruisers, were nearly invisible in the chaos. A fortunate Gracer strike still claimed the 93 lives aboard the UHS Stormbreaker, however, ripping the ship apart before the pilot had even a moment to perceive the threat. The 11 remaining boarding vessels fired their thrusters as they slipped into the bomb-scarred shuttle bay, each transforming a potential catastrophic collision into a gentle touchdown. Only the powerful inertial dampeners AVR engineers had installed on the landing ships, activated now that they'd cleared the Super Dreadnought's field of defensive fire, prevented their crews from liquefying. Their soft impacts were barely noticeable against the rhythmic pounding of the hundreds of warheads striking the ram every few seconds. A small group of engineers exited the ship and began cutting through the Super Dreadnought's sealed access hatchways, their visors dimmed to shield their eyes from the blinding light emitted by their own fusion bombs. They're mad, the AVR thought. Every single one of these humans are mad. On the Ironclad, his squad was conducting their final combat checks with relentless efficiency. The AVR's preparations were simpler than the humans. Apart from 2 quick checks on his helmet seal and his flechette launcher's ammo count, everything was automated. Somewhere in the bay, a human turned up the battle song to prevent it from being drowned out by the harsh clacks of 80 men readying weapons and armor. The small huddle of officers and senior non-coms dispersed and returned to their squads, 3rd Squad's section leader among them. The warrant officer didn't appear pleased with the news he'd received. Intel just raised their initial force estimates. They're expecting 5 or 6 platoons worth of Krivath shock troopers in addition to the Merc regulars, so we're outnumbered again. He glanced at Gold. Tweety, how bad is it? The nickname had stuck despite the young AVR's earnest objections, but he was beginning to accept it. Krivath are tougher than the Merc, Chief. The Compact trains them for frontline work. Something about them making other races uncomfortable, so they're disciplined and capable. Their code of honor's strict, though. Manage to capture one in battle, and he'll follow you as docile as a pup. Pretty much in line with Navint's primer. For the rest of you grunts, just shoot the scary wolves with guns. A shot to the head'll take 'em down if you can't get rounds into their center mass. Merc won't fall as easily, though. So keep putting rounds into them until you hit the brain case. No standard parts on those bastards, so walk your shots. Primary objectives unchanged. Seize the bridge and stop this monster. Failing that, take their big gun out of commission and buy the fleet some more time. Don't mess this up, Marines. Nothing else can stop this beast. On the Everlasting's bridge, the battle song transformed into a rhythmic chant, each bar pushing against the furious tempo. Out in the void, the ram continued to fly through the teeth of the human ambush. The small casualty counter in the corner of Faith's display ticked past 10,000 as the Super Dreadnought's main gun ripped apart a 7th human capital ship. The human ambassador leaned forward as she watched a fresh list of the injured and the dead scroll across the screen, her face drawn into a tight frown. You don't have to keep watching, you know. Faith turned towards Mottled, her expression grim. I'm not looking away from this. When we finally track down whatever monster's responsible for this, I'm going to make them pay tenfold for every death and every injury. They're gonna scream." The way her voice growled out her last sentence almost sent me scurrying for cover. If this was one of the humans' emissaries of peace, what were their warriors like? A flurry of new movements on the main tactical display yanked me back to the present. The fleeing Merc cruiser had reversed course and aimed itself at the humans' far flank. It no doubt hoped to pick off a few easy kills, while the missile cruisers were distracted by the ram. It was a foolish and suicidal move, but the Merc captain was probably too dim to realize that. Instead, he charged forward with reckless abandon. 9th Missile Squadron, the Merc cruiser's target, dealt with the threat by shifting their aim for a mere 24 seconds. 600 missiles soon erased the last remaining Merc cruiser from the sky. Their actions followed the humans' naval doctrine to the letter. They'd recognized an imminent threat and eliminated it with overwhelming force, using their only long-range weapon system to do it. The entire series of events had been professional, by the book, and utterly, horribly wrong. 5 seconds. After 9th Squadron redirected their fire away, a battery of Gracer blisters on board the ram suddenly found their sector free of incoming targets. Freed from their desperate point defense, the automated systems cast their sensors outwards, tracing back along the paths of the unknown projectiles that had held their attention just microseconds ago, only to come up short against a dead end 8,000 kilometers away from the super dreadnought. They could trace the missiles back to the pods, but the pods seemed to appear from nowhere. That kept them puzzled for a full 7 seconds. On the 8th, their analysis suggested the presence of human missile cruisers in the space between each pair of pods. A tentative shot from one of the battery's 17 remaining grazers confirmed the suspicion, and the rest of the blisters opened fire. 9th Squadron, 11th Squadron, and most of 10th Squadron were erased from existence before the human admiralty could readjust their fields of fire. The damage was already done, however. With nearly a tenth of their cruiser strength gone and their ammo reserves critically low, the human barrage began to waver. The ram continued its approach. The human boarding party had landed in a vacant section of the ship. Thousands of crew quarters, storerooms, and living spaces were empty. "Another deserted room," sighed one of the Marines as he cleared another cabin. "Why would the Galactic send in an unmanned ship?" "Plausible deniability, numbnuts," Master Corporal Jenkins retorted. "Send a ship through the gate packed with the compact's finest, and someone's bound to talk. Send the same ship with a crew of Merc privateers, though, and you can act all innocent if anyone tries to point fingers. Our warship, but it couldn't be our warship. The crew's been planetside for months." "Sounds like the compact," Tweety chimed in. "Their bureaucrats hate getting their hands dirty almost as much as they like keeping things nice and orderly. Damn straight they don't. It's why the whole lot of them is doomed." Several groans erupted over the channel, and one Corporal Puck tried to interrupt him. "Don't get Jenkins going. He'll never quit." If the corporal heard any of the protests, he didn't show it. You see, the whole thing really just comes down to sticks. Galactics have been fighting with sticks for millennia. They craft the best sticks, design the best anti-stick armor, even teach the best courses on stick warfare. Plus, they ensure all the fights always boil down to who's got the biggest stick. Keeps things nice and predictable for the bureaucrats. The squad entered a vacant cafeteria, Jenkins pausing his tirade while they surveyed the area with robotic precision. Then they moved into another empty hallway, and he resumed. "Then we show up. The compact bursts through the gate, weapons swinging, and we just hide in the bushes and lob rocks. They start stomping around, trying to track down the few guys we have wielding weapons, and we sneak in close and smack them in the back of the head with a rock. Then we can grab their weapon and don their armor. We're going to do it here, we'll do it again, and soon we'll be holding all the weapons and all the rocks. Galactic bastards don't stand a chance." "We won't either if they sneak up on us while you're chattering, Corporal," grumbled the warrant officer. "Keep this channel clear unless you've got something important to add." "Sorry, Chief. Just bringing Tweety up to speed on the new Galactic order." "That'll be the day. Just zip it and watch your sector." 3rd Squad advanced the next 100 or so meters in quiet, then turned the corner and walked into a Merc ambush. The squat, asymmetrical aliens poured out through air vents and storage lockers, virtually invisible until it was too late. The initial barrage of shots hit both the squad's sergeants, 4 privates, and the warrant officer. Their powered armor, designed to stop bullets and deflect lasers, barely slowed the pulse rifle fire. Every shot was lethal. The surviving Marines ducked into the safety of an abandoned restroom before their fallen comrades had hit the floor. Tweety was right behind, his 4 eyes wide with fear. When a merc tried to follow, the 4 humans tore him apart with flechettes. Outside in the corridor, the warrant officer's strained voice echoed over his armor speakers. "Got a surprise for you, uglies." He set off all of his grenades, filling the hallway with shrapnel and flames. Jenkins chuckled quietly. "Mom always did say I was born to lead." The blast that struck the RFS Everlasting was, from the Ram's perspective, a fortunate mishap. The frigate would have collapsed under a direct hit. Instead, the enormous Gracer beam had barely skimmed them, its true power aimed at where the UH Sovereign rested, just 50 kilometers behind. Even a glancing blow was enough to tear the frigate's hull, though. The helmets and magnetic clamps on Faith and Model's combat suits activated with alarming rapidity, saving them as the bridge's atmosphere rushed out through a ragged opening. Modeled felt a surge of dread as the battle song cut off, but it subsided when he realized the comm channel was still functioning. The radio channels remained quiet. The AVR glanced around the bridge, confused. Where were the damage reports? Where were the check-ins? Why wasn't anyone taking action? He swiftly discovered the reason. The Flock Lord's body drifted in the center of the command bubble, impaled by numerous shards that had broken off from the outer hull. Most of his staff and second-in-command had met the same fate. Only a shell-shocked intelligence officer and the human military attaché had survived, both of them injured. Mottled switched his radio to Faith's private channel. "We've got a situation." "Yeah, obviously the side of the ship just fell apart." "It's more serious than that." When her gaze followed his extended grasping arm to the middle of the bridge, she blanched. "Everyone on this ship who knows how to operate it just got killed." "Not everyone," she replied grimly. Another icon appeared in their circuit as she tapped at her wrist screen. "Hey, Karamazov, still remember how to command a vessel?" "Yes, ma'am." The Rear Admiral's response sounded slightly distracted, his focus on the 2-foot piece of metal sticking out of his leg. "Why, got one for me." "Yep. How about the Everlasting?" The channel went quiet for a moment. "Are we even allowed to do that? Their entire command staff just died. I don't think anyone's going to put up much resistance." "Very well." His icon moved to the general channel. "This is Rear Admiral Zoltan. I'm taking command of the Everlasting. Any objections?" The channel remained silent except for the singer's lament. After waiting for what seemed like the appropriate duration, Zoltan proceeded. "All right then. Damage reports, if you please." Out in the void, the ram continued its approach. Jenkins was shouting orders as the survivors of 3rd Squad rushed towards the bridge. "Okay, guys, you know the drill. Wallace and Roberts, you're on suppression with me. Puck, put a round through anyone who shows their heads. Tweety, go play deathball." 3 grunts and a squawk acknowledged his orders. By now, we all understood our roles. Tweety was somewhat surprised at how well he fit into the squad. The first time they'd stormed one of the Mirek barricades, the avian warrior had fallen behind, watching the Marines land shot after shot with uncanny precision. Even with the battle song urging him forward, he hadn't been able to match the humans' intensity. The 3rd time they'd overrun a pocket of resistance, he'd kept up with the rest. He'd led the charge by the 5th, using his smaller frame and greater agility to bounce between the walls of the Dreadnought's narrow corridors, darting forward faster than the terrified merc could react. After clearing the 9th barricade and losing 2 more men, 3rd Squad had found their strategy. Now, just outside the command bridge, they prepared to use it once more. Tweety was crouched, ready to surge forward one last time, when the tremors began again. Another dose of stims chased them away, but it wasn't a good sign. Without the rush of the drugs and the battle song, the small avian would likely have collapsed hours ago. As the humans opened fire with scavenged pulse rifles, Tweety sprang forward, diving over their heads and latching his claws onto a ventilation grate. He swiftly leapt off, his head brushing the ceiling as he zagged across the corridor. and scrabbled against the smooth plating with his claws for the briefest moment. Then he was off again, already more than halfway to the enemy fortifications. A hail of pulsar darts seared the air mere inches below him. They halted a few seconds later, allowing him just enough time to duck behind the improvised barricade a group of Krivath soldiers had constructed. He landed softly, lobbed a grenade directly behind the enemy troops, and darted around the corner. When he peered back around the corner, his human companions were dispatching the remaining Krivath. Their frightening precision more than compensated for their lack of nimbleness. "Tweety, you're getting way too good at this," commented Roberts. "We might just have to find a way to keep you." Puck snatched a fresh pulse rifle from the fallen defenders and began to take up a position outside the door, but Jenkins stopped him short. "No pulse rifles in there. It might damage something important. We'll have to go in with the old tech." Tweety glanced down at his empty grenade belt. "Do we have any flechettes left?" Jenkins just chuckled and tossed his pulse rifles to the floor. "A few, but it hardly matters. Has Roberts had a chance to tell you about that martial arts obsession of his?" The battle song had lost its vigor. Mottled wasn't sure when it had happened, but he knew why. The human fleet lay in ruins. Only 2 human dreadnoughts remained. More than half of the Banisher missile cruisers had been destroyed when their dwindling ammo reserves forced them to slow their bombardment, and the ram had nearly cleared the ambush. The super dreadnought's hull was scarred. Not shattered, mankind had hit it with enough warheads to crack a small planet, and still it pressed forward like some ancient primal god. Yet the humans fought on, their tenacity astonishing the battle-weary Aviar. Their ships were crippled, their leaders cut off or dead, but they refused to accept defeat. The UHS Excalibur, its laser array ineffective against the ram's powerful screens, leaked air and lifeboats as it accelerated towards the super dreadnought. The capital ship crumpled as it collided with its much larger bulk, then detonated with the force of a small nova as its oversized fusion reactors overloaded. 30 Grasser blisters fell silent. Scattered missile squadrons attempted futilely to keep pace with the ram, pushing their engines well beyond their cruise limits to launch salvo after salvo at the rapidly retreating super dreadnought. One by one they fell silent as their acceleration took its toll on their crews. And on the bridge of the Everlasting, Zoltan continued issuing orders. He was a whirlwind of energy, speaking with a quiet authority that seemed far louder than any yell or shout. Something about his demeanor propelled the AVR crew forward. "Weapons? Where are my grazers?" "Almost back online, sir. Damage control's routing a new power line as we speak." "Excellent. Engines, what's the status on thrust?" "Just came back online, sir. Compensators should follow shortly. Inform me the moment they're powered. Helm, begin plotting a course for the ram. We're going to fly right down its throat and see if we can't inflict some damage before it tears us out of the sky. Comms, you still with us?" "Aye, sir. I don't care if you have to lean out the window and shout. You keep that battle song going out. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "You feel that, Helm? Compensator just kicked back in. Weapons, what are you doing with my guns?" "Just brought them online, sir. We're running the initial tests." "Forget the tests. We wouldn't have time to fix them anyway. Warm her up for a real shot." Zoltan paused. "Helm, get the Everlasting underway. Let's go spit in the devil's eye." Faith's clear voice cut into the fray. "Belay that, Rear Admiral." The bridge paused, every eye turning to stare at the human diplomat. The goofy smile spread across her face couldn't have been more out of place. "We're picking up a new broadcast from the ram, Zoltan. You're going to want to take a look." About 30 of the surviving human Marines milled about the bridge of the ram, dividing their attention between watching their prisoners and gaining control of the ship's systems. Jenkins was fiddling with a control panel built into an oversized command chair. "Damn it! I could have sworn I'd figured out how to turn this thing on." Gold staggered over and cast an appraising eye over a small readout on the armrest. "You did," he said, voice slurring with exhaustion. Roberts let out a cackle. "Think you flipped it on about 2 minutes ago." Jenkins sat bolt upright, his face ashen. "Wait, it's on?" The tired AVR nodded serenely. "Yep." "And broadcasting?" "Yep." "For almost 2 minutes?" "Yep." "Shit." Jenkins paused. The LT wouldn't happen to be hovering just outside the door, ready to swoop in at the last minute and save me, would he? Nope, he bought it about an hour back. Fuck. Well, here goes nothing. He took a moment to compose himself before turning to face the pickup. This is Master Corporal Finn Blackwell, broadcasting from the bridge of the GCS Ram. Could you stop shooting at us? We've got their stick. While the humans cheered, the AVR rejoiced. Their singer sang a new song, a song of victory, and the Everlasting's comm buoy carried it out to the rest of their exiled race. And at the end, after the last stirring chords of celebration had faded, the AVR added a brief message. Come join us. We've been without a home for far too long.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.